Welcome to Crafty Soup, everybody. My name is Misty. Today's episode is about monochromatic layout and adding texture with mixed media techniques. Now, I'm a creative team member over at Scrap Happy, and this post is dedicated to their blog. You can find information about the Scrap Happy community at scraphappy.org. So let's get started. Today I'm using this watercolor paper, and it is a 12 by 16 size, so I will just cut it down to 12 by 12. I've got my Winsor & Newton watercolors, although there's a couple of other random brands mixed in there. And I wet down my watercolors with a spray bottle to activate them, and I'm just wetting the green and blue and a little bit of yellow hues because I'm going to be mixing up these tones to get varying shades of green. And I am just swiping with a wide flat brush up from the bottom of my layout. And as I go, I do mix in more yellow or more blue so that I can vary those shades like I mentioned. And once I'm done with this process, this first layer, I will go ahead and set that aside to dry and work on other parts of the layout. You can see me mixing further tones of color here as we go, and these swipes, because this layer is still wet, those swipes will kind of blend and bleed into each other a little bit, so it will soften and merge some of those lines together. And like I said, I am going to do this layout in multiple layers, so I will go ahead and set that layer aside and work on another step of this process. While that layer dries, I'm going to go ahead and work on my photos. I have printed my photos, 2 prints to a 4x6 sheet, and if you use a Photoshop product to handle your prints, I can link you up to the template that I use for this. Now, these aren't quite 3 by 4 inch prints, they're slightly smaller than that, but I liked that size better to fit on this layout. Okay, and here I am moving on with my second layer of watercolor, and the process is exactly the same, but because that bottom layer is dry, this layer will sit on top of that, and because watercolor is translucent, you'll get a lot of mixing of shades between the stripes, through the stripes, and so I like to do multiple layers in order to get that depth of dimension. I'm going to clean up my space and set that aside to dry, and then I'm going to move on to the next step, which is some paper tearing. I have this pile of scraps from my stash, and I'm going to select hues in green because this is a monochromatic layout, and I am trying to find layouts with a contrast in tone, a contrast in texture that have, printed elements on them, and so I'm going to pick and choose between these, and I am going to tear strips off of these, and then I will tear those strips down even smaller and layer them up as little mats behind my photo. These aren't going to be full mats, I'm just actually doing the left and right edges of my photos. I've done all of my photos that way with a little bit of matting on both the left and right edges, and I will go ahead and set those aside. And then once my layer is dry, I'm going to come back with more mixed media, more texture, and I'm adding splatters to this. And I'm going to do these spatters in 2 different ways. First, I'm just using this brush to add some spatters, and that's kind of giving me some smaller spatters. Then I'm going to put the watercolor onto this stamp block and then swipe it off the edge, and you'll see right there how it can give me bigger splatters, and it also can give you directional spatters. So those are 2 different ways to add that. And now I'm doing some lifting. What I did is that paper towel is saturated with water, and I am using a stamp to stamp onto the watercolor with plenty of pressure and plenty of water, and I leave it there for a moment to let that water reactivate the watercolor, and then I tap off that water, and that'll lift away some of the color as well. With a dry towel, I do that. And now I'm going to come in and stamp on my layout after I've done that lifting, and I'm using a puddle of watercolor paint as an ink pad, and I just tap my stamp into that puddle and I stamp on there. Now this is going to be a very blurry effect. You're not going to get a sharp, crisp image when you stamp this way, but I'm going to add more texture with an actual ink pad, and this is it's a Concord and Ninth ink product, and I am adding texture all over this layout with multi-generational stamping, where I ink it up once and stamp 3, 4, or sometimes 5 times to get varying shades and texture of that stamp. All right, now I put my photos back on and realized some of the stamping got lost behind the photos, so I'm just stamping in the spaces that I know are going to be seen and revealed to add that texture back in there. I could have done that at the first step, but I just wasn't thinking that way yet, so sometimes that goes on. Now, I love to add doodled borders to my edges, and I did that. I am going to finish off that border with journaling later, so wait for that part. And now I'm building up a title block. I've added these glittery green stickers to this layout, which I had no idea what I was going to use those stickers for, but they're perfect on a monochromatic layout. And there you saw me add my journaling in. So my title block is done and my journaling is done, and I'm going to move on to more layers and more texture. I'm using those same scraps of paper to run through my die cut machine to get various leaves, and I am sure to vary the texture and color in my leaves as well. So I've got some solid leaves and I've got some loose, open, textured leaves. And then we're going to glue these all down. So instead of adding glue directly to the back of these leaves, which can be hard with those detailed cuts, I take a scratch piece of something. I have this plastic palette, is reusable, and I'll put a puddle of glue and I just kind of drag my leaves through the glue, and that adds just enough glue to adhere them down without it oozing around the edges. And that's especially good for those open, fine die cuts. It's not as necessary for these larger die cuts, but since I had that puddle of glue there, I just went ahead and did it. So that adds all the glue to this layout. And I am sure to add some of those leaves around my torn paper strip mats on my photos so that I'm adding all of that texture. And then that alpha set was blending in a little too much to the background. So one tip that I have that I learned a long time ago is to outline alphas, or anything really that's blending too much, with an ink pen, and that gives it more definition. So that does finish off all of this mixed media monochromatic layout for this time. I will leave you with some close-ups, and here you can see that ink lifting technique much better. And here's my ink stamping versus my watercolor puddle stamping to see the difference in texture there. I do hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, it is a creative team post for our Scrap Happy group, and so I will link you up to the blog, and head over there and check out the blog. We have lots of tips and tricks. This month we're talking about green specifically, but each month we have a new theme. And if you're interested in a scrapbooking community, Scrap Happy is very friendly, very open, and we'd love to have you join us.